Let me ask you something that might sting a little. Have you ever walked away from someone and, instead of closure, you gave them silence? No drama. No explanation. Just distance. And in that stillness, they smiled, they posted, they laughed, at least on the outside. But deep down, something shifted. You could feel it, even if you didn't see it. That's the paradox we're diving into today. Why they'll pretend they're fine, while your silence echoes through the chambers of their soul. This isn't about ghosting. This isn't about revenge. This is about choosing inner peace in a world that screams for attention. And if you've ever wondered why your absence hits harder than your presence ever did, this might just be the clarity you didn't know you needed. Here's the problem. Our culture tells us the louder person wins. That the one who posts more, moves on faster, or replaces quicker is the one in control. We've been conditioned to think that strength means reacting. That if you care, you should fight, explain, fix. But what if I told you that's a trap? A well-packaged illusion that keeps you stuck performing for someone who's already stopped listening. The truth? Sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's your loudest boundary. It's not passive. It's precise. Calculated. Transformational. That's the part they never expect. You see, in Stoic relationships, silence isn't about abandonment, it's about alignment. It's you walking away, not with anger, but with understanding. Not to prove a point, but to protect your peace. This video isn't just a reminder of your worth. It's a revelation. One that pulls you out of reaction mode and places you right back in your power. A Stoicism-infused framework that strips away illusions, breaks the cycle of emotional performance, and builds something unshakable from the inside out. And here's the exciting part. When you apply what we're about to explore, you won't just survive detachment. You'll thrive in it. You'll rise, not with bitterness, but with breathtaking composure. So if you've ever questioned whether your silence mattered, or if your stillness was noticed, stick with me. Because by the end of this, you'll stop doubting your distance and start owning your evolution. Let's uncover what they won't admit, and what your silence never had to say out loud. Ready? Then don't go anywhere. The part that's coming next might just change everything. 1. The illusion of indifference. They smile, post, and party like they're thriving. But all the noise is just a cover-up for the internal silence they can't escape. Their peace is performative, designed for the outside world. You've seen it before. Right after you go silent, their energy shifts. Not inward but outward. Suddenly, they're posting more than ever, going out every night, tagging themselves at events they never used to care about, all while laughing just a little too hard in that Instagram story. But the question is, who are they really trying to convince? You or themselves? And why does it matter so much that the world thinks they're unbothered? Let's dig deeper. This isn't just coincidence. It's a defense mechanism. Because when you detach quietly, without explanation, without chasing, it leaves them with nothing to react to. And for someone who thrived on your attention, that void becomes unbearable. Stoicism teaches us that external reactions don't define truth, inner clarity does. And in Stoic relationships, you learn that some performances aren't about confidence, they're about panic. The louder they get, the more they're trying to mute what's inside. Think about it. Have you ever noticed someone pretending to be over you with such force, it almost felt like a cry for help? That's because it was. It's not just about forgetting you. It's about escaping the mirror your silence forced them to face. When they can't hear your voice, they're left with their own, and for some people, that's the scariest sound in the world. They didn't expect you to stay silent. They expected chaos. That's how they measured significance before, through conflict, reaction, attention. But when you remove all of that, the performance begins. And let me be clear, it's not just any performance. It's calculated, curated, intentional. Because silence has a way of stripping away their illusions of control. They think they're playing it cool, but your stillness has changed the entire stage. No longer are they the star of your emotional focus. Now, they're playing for an audience that doesn't respond. And that's terrifying. Because silence doesn't validate. It doesn't comfort. It doesn't explain. It just is. And when someone loses access to your emotional feedback, their entire strategy collapses. That's when they turn to optics, outfits, stories, flirtations, distractions, because if they can't reach you, they'll try to prove they're above needing you. But here's the truth Stoicism reveals. True detachment isn't about what you show the world, it's about what you no longer seek from it. While they're out there trying to show they've moved on, you're actually moving on, not with noise, but with direction. They'll pose for pictures, but they can't pose peace. And that's the cost of losing someone who chose silence as a sanctuary. You see, Stoic relationships aren't measured by how loud the exit is, but by how quietly the respect is reclaimed. When you leave without a performance, you reclaim your power, and they're left scrambling for something, anything, that proves they still matter. That's why they'll flood their feed with smiles, group photos, new connections. Not because they're healed, but because they're hoping you'll notice. Hoping you'll flinch. Hoping you'll break. But you don't. Because you've stopped performing. You've stopped reacting. You've started evolving. And when you stop giving them the fuel they once relied on, they become desperate to create a flame on their own. This is what they never tell you. Pretending to be fine is exhausting. It requires more energy than actually being at peace. And eventually, the cracks start to show. In their inconsistencies. In their tone. In their posts. They become obsessed with being perceived as over it, even if that perception costs them their authenticity. But the real question is, why do they care so much? Why is it so vital that you see them as untouched? The answer lies in ego. In the illusion of superiority. Because to them, being the one who cared less means they won. But you weren't playing a game. You were healing. You weren't avoiding closure, you were becoming it. And they can't compete with that. Because while they're chasing validation, you're mastering restraint. While they're seeking reactions, you're reclaiming clarity. And that clarity is louder than any post they could ever share. In Stoicism, power isn't found in how much noise you make, it's in how little noise you need. That's what makes your silence so unsettling. It's not empty. It's full of intention. It's not passive. It's disciplined. And the longer it lasts, the more their performance unravels. They didn't think you'd last this long. They thought the silence was temporary. A tactic. A bluff. But it wasn't. It was a transformation. And now they're stuck pretending while you've already progressed. The illusion of indifference is fragile. It breaks under its own weight. Because eventually, even the most convincing mask slips. Even the most polished post can't cover a restless soul. And when the world isn't watching, when the music stops and the crowd fades, your silence is still there, echoing. Not to punish, but to remind. Not of who you were, but of who you no longer are. And that realization? That's what haunts them most. 2. When silence becomes presence. When someone leaves your life, especially in confusion or without closure, there's a strange expectation that your silence will be passive, that it will feel like absence, like defeat, like vanishing into the background. But that's not what truly happens, is it? Because real silence, the kind that comes from intention and inner strength, doesn't disappear. It multiplies. It echoes. And over time, it stops feeling like you're gone. It starts feeling like you're everywhere. You become the presence they didn't expect to miss. Not because you're reaching out. Not because you're watching them. But because your absence refuses to fade. This is the power of stillness when it's rooted in self-respect. This is the wisdom at the heart of Stoicism, the ability to withhold energy not out of spite, but out of alignment. Because what they assumed would be silence quickly becomes something else entirely, presence in its most potent, untouchable form. You ever notice how some people seem louder the more you pull away? How suddenly they need to be seen, praised, validated, as if your quiet hit them harder than your words ever could. That's because it did. The thing is, they don't miss the noise. They miss the balance your energy used to bring. They miss the attention they took for granted. They miss the emotional gravity you brought to their life, the calm that kept them from spinning, even if they never acknowledged it out loud. And now that it's gone, not with anger, but with grace, it's haunting them. In Stoic relationships, your restraint becomes your reputation. Not because you're hiding, but because you've grown. Because you no longer chase comfort in chaos or truth in temporary affection. Your silence isn't a pause. It's a statement. It's a reminder of every time you showed up without needing recognition. Every time you gave, listened, cared deeply. And now, without those things, they feel the difference. Even if they can't admit it. Especially if they can't admit it. It lingers. In the spaces between their laughter. In the pauses between their sentences. In the way they look over their shoulder when a familiar song plays. You're not saying anything. But you're saying everything. And they know it. That's what makes your silence so powerful. It forces them to sit with themselves. With their decisions. With the way they exited, the way they avoided, the way they underestimated your presence. Because when you don't react, you hand them a mirror. And in that mirror, they see not your rage, not your desperation, but your detachment. And detachment, true Stoic detachment, isn't apathy. It's clarity. It's the ability to walk away without needing to drag someone with you. It's the grace of no longer explaining your worth to someone who was never listening. And the more they sit in that stillness, the more they realize that the silence they thought meant nothing has now become everything. They hear it when they scroll and don't see your name. When they post and you don't react. When they share and you don't show up. And each time that happens, a piece of their performance cracks. Because deep down, they were counting on you to break the silence. To need closure. To ask why. To come back just one more time. But you didn't. And now, they're stuck wondering, not what happened to you, but what happened to the version of you they used to depend on. And that wonder, that haunting curiosity, is far more powerful than any explanation ever could have been. Your silence didn't close a door. It opened a new one. One that leads to self-respect, to strength, to a presence that doesn't beg to be acknowledged. And the longer they try to distract themselves, the more obvious it becomes, you're still there, just not in the way they're used to. You're not in their inbox. You're in their mind. You're not showing up in messages. You're showing up in moments. In the songs, the memories, the in-betweens. Because silence is never truly silent. It resonates. And when it comes from someone who once gave everything, it becomes unforgettable. That's the irony. They tried to forget you with noise. But noise fades. Silence doesn't. You didn't shout. You didn't plead. You just stopped. And that stillness? That's what changed everything. In Stoicism, we learn that our energy is currency, and silence is how we invest it wisely. You're not missing. You're meditating. You're not avoiding. You're evolving. And the difference between those two is what separates a reaction from a revolution. They thought they could erase your presence with performance. But presence isn't about activity. It's about impact. And your impact didn't need applause. It needed peace. That's what they feel now, the peace they tried to disturb still holding its ground. Your silence doesn't scream, but it surrounds. It circles back in their quiet hours. It moves through the cracks of their confidence. It's not cruel. It's complete. That's what makes it unforgettable. So if this part is speaking to you, if you've ever felt your silence was mistaken for indifference, if you've ever watched someone pretend while knowing your presence still lives rent-free in their mind, like and comment. Number 1. If this video resonates with your experience. And make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next. This journey of stoicism and strength isn't over yet, and your voice, yes, even your silent one, deserves to be part of something bigger. 3. The mind fills in the blanks. There's something uniquely unsettling about unanswered silence. Not the kind that comes from avoidance, but the kind that arrives with intention, the kind that doesn't need to be explained, justified, or softened. That kind of silence leaves space. And space, to the human mind, is unbearable. Because we are wired to complete stories. To resolve open loops. To finish what began, even if it ended without warning. So when you go quiet, not out of manipulation, but out of self-respect, the other person is left to fill in the blanks. And their mind, desperate for control, begins writing narratives. Not based on your truth, but based on their fears. They'll ask themselves questions they'll never say aloud. Why did he stop reaching out? Did he stop caring? Was I replaceable all along? Those questions come like whispers at first, easy to ignore during the day, drowned out by distractions and artificial smiles. But at night, when the phone is down, when the noise fades, and the performance ends, that silence roars. That's when your absence becomes a storm in their thoughts. Stoicism teaches us that clarity comes not through reaction, but through reflection. And nothing triggers reflection like the silence of someone who used to care without hesitation. You gave them something consistent, your presence, your attention, your energy. And when that disappears, the contrast doesn't just confuse them, it convicts them. They thought they could control your emotions by keeping things unclear. But your silence created clarity they never expected. You're no longer available for confusion. And in that clarity, their ego begins to unravel. Because when you were loud, they felt powerful. They knew exactly how to push, how to provoke, how to get a reaction. But now, they're alone in the dialogue, talking to a version of you that exists only in memory. And memories, when not fed by presence, begin to morph into obsession. What did he mean by that last message? Was he already letting go? Did I misread everything? These thoughts become loops, mental scripts on repeat, all because you didn't respond. That's the paradox. They thought silence meant surrender. But instead, it ignited the most unrelenting confrontation they could experience, one with themselves. Because when there's nothing left to fight, nothing left to fix, and nothing left to follow, they're left with only one thing: accountability. And accountability is terrifying for people who've spent their lives avoiding it. In Stoic relationships, you don't demand closure, you become it. And when someone realizes that, when they sense they've lost access not just to your words but to your world, the fear that kicks in is primal. Because it's not about losing you. It's about no longer being able to influence how you see them. They no longer get to control the narrative. They no longer get to rewrite the script. They're stuck with the truth of how they left, how they treated you, how they pushed you away. And now, every post they share, every comment they drop, every fake smile they curate, it all carries an undercurrent of desperation. A hope that you'll notice. That you'll break. That you'll give them something, anything, to prove they still matter. But Stoicism is about the discipline of detachment. You don't flinch. You don't feed their ego with a view, like a message. And the longer you withhold that energy, the more their imagination takes over. Because the human mind abhors uncertainty. It needs to know. And when it doesn't know, it creates. It imagines you happier, stronger, more fulfilled. Maybe with someone else. Maybe completely free of the pain they once caused. And that image, that projection, it eats at them more than the truth ever could. Because it's not you reminding them of what they lost. It's their own conscience doing the work. That's the beauty of silent self-respect. It delegates justice to their own mind. And there's no escaping that. They'll try. They'll distract themselves. They'll date quickly. They'll post more often. But none of it sticks. Because unresolved silence breeds internal noise. And when that noise grows loud enough, it turns into anxiety, regret, even envy. Envy of the peace you found. Envy of the stillness you live in. Envy of the power you reclaimed. That's when the cracks start to show. In their actions. In their words. In the way they watch your story from a burner account. In the way they bring you up in passing, casually asking mutual friends how you're doing, hoping for a clue. But you don't give them one. You stay still. Not to manipulate, but to heal. Because in Stoicism, healing isn't loud, it's deliberate. And the mind that once took you for granted now trembles with the weight of what it couldn't keep. You've become the unanswered question they can't escape. Not because you disappeared, but because you refused to be reduced. Because you rose, not in retaliation, but in evolution. You see, your silence isn't a blank page. It's a mirror. It reflects everything they've avoided. Every lie they told themselves. Every excuse they used to justify their choices. And now, in the absence of your words, all of those things surface. That's what Stoic relationships are built on, not on endless explanation, but on disciplined exits. You left with dignity. And now they're stuck with the echo. It's not cruel. It's natural. Because sometimes the best way to show someone the impact of their behavior isn't by telling them, it's by removing yourself completely and letting the silence speak in your place. And make no mistake, it does speak. It speaks in the sleepless nights. In the silence between their texts. In the way they check your profile and pretend they didn't. In the way they act unbothered, only to spiral when they realize you're no longer checking in. That's the cost of misjudging your value. They thought you'd break. But your silence broke them. Not with vengeance. With reflection. Not with chaos. With calm. And that calm? It's what sets you apart now. Because while they're spinning, guessing, projecting, you're not even participating. You've left the narrative. You're writing a new one. And in this one, you're not the one who needs answers. You are the answer. That's the consequence they didn't expect. Not anger. Not revenge. But irrelevance. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know where you stand. And that unknown, that void, that's what haunts them. Because it forces them to do the one thing they tried to avoid all along, look inward. And in that inward gaze they find the truth. Not about you, but about themselves. You just held up the mirror and walked away. 4. Stillness is your power move. There's a moment in every journey where you stop reaching, stop proving, stop reacting, not because you've run out of energy, but because you've redirected it. You no longer feel the need to clarify your silence, or justify your distance. That moment, when you embrace stillness not as withdrawal but as wisdom, is the moment you take back your power in full. And what most people don't realize is that this kind of stillness, this level of composure, is not natural, it's earned. It's developed through disappointment, forged in self-awareness, and reinforced through boundaries that no longer shift to accommodate someone else's chaos. It's tempting to think that power lies in presence, in loud gestures, in statements and confrontations. But Stoicism teaches us something radically different. True power lies in what you don't do, in what you choose to withhold, in what you no longer need to say. And when you embody that, when your silence becomes the full expression of your strength, you stop reacting to the noise they tried to provoke. You stop dancing to rhythms you didn't choose. They expected tears, breakdowns, long late-night paragraphs filled with pain. Instead, they got stillness. They got peace. And that peace didn't just silence the room, it shifted the dynamic completely. Because now you're not engaging on their level. You've risen above it. You're no longer participating in the drama. You're practicing discipline. And that's what confuses them most. Because when someone is used to triggering you, used to seeing their presence ignite something in you, your indifference becomes a mirror they weren't ready for. Suddenly, they're no longer in control. They can't bait you. They can't guilt you. They can't spin a story where you're still the emotionally reactive one. That version of you is gone. Stillness killed it. And in its place stands someone entirely new. Someone whose worth is no longer up for debate. Someone who doesn't flinch, doesn't chase, doesn't fold under pressure. That's the gift of Stoic relationships. You stop chasing clarity from those who bring confusion. You stop asking for love in places where you're merely tolerated. And once you learn that your peace is more valuable than their presence, you stop giving access to people who cost you your balance. The silence they thought meant apathy now feels like armor. Not because you're guarded, but because you're grounded. You're no longer reacting to projections. You're responding to reality. And the reality is, their story doesn't need you to validate it. Their chaos doesn't need your commentary. Your silence is no longer about them. It's about you. It's about choosing solitude over spectacle. Growth over grudges. Evolution over ego. That's the essence of Stoicism, to act according to what aligns with your principles, not what panders to someone else's comfort. And when you act like that, when you live like that, your stillness becomes louder than any reaction they hoped for. They'll try to provoke you. Subtle posts, indirect comments, cryptic songs. But nothing works. Because you're no longer triggered by immaturity. You've outgrown that emotional currency. You're paying in peace now. They can't afford your energy anymore. And when they realize that, when it finally sinks in that their performance has no audience, the illusion breaks. Because what is attention without response? What is manipulation without leverage? It's nothing. It's a hollow act. And they feel that. Every time they reach and you don't respond. Every time they test your boundary and you don't bend. That stillness, it's like a wall they can't scale. Not because you built it high, but because you stopped building altogether. You've simply moved on. You're not waiting behind the silence. You're expanding within it. And that truth, the fact that you're healing in the space they thought would hurt you, is what hits them the hardest. Because now they're not dealing with a wounded version of you. They're dealing with a whole version. A steady version. A version who doesn't need a reaction to feel resolved. And in a world that teaches us to perform, to prove, to post, that kind of stillness feels like rebellion. But it's not rebellion, it's revolution. It's the quiet restructuring of your life around dignity. And nothing threatens someone more than knowing they can't access the old version of you, no matter how hard they try. That's the thing about growth. It makes you unrecognizable to those who only knew you in survival. And once you step into that power, once you own that stillness, you realize something liberating. You don't need to respond to be understood. You don't need to react to be remembered. You don't need to fight to feel heard. Your composure is its own declaration. Your stillness is its own response. And in that stillness, you stop negotiating with people who never had your best interest at heart. You stop handing your peace over like it's disposable. You start treating your energy like it's sacred. Because it is. And once you know that, you can unknow it. You can't go back to being reactive. You can't go back to explaining your worth to people who won't even look you in the eyes. You can't go back to watering gardens that never grew anything but confusion. That version of you is done. And what replaces it is someone so still, so grounded, so at peace, that they can't provoke a storm in you even if they tried. That's your power now. That's what they can't reach. So let them keep trying. Let them keep pretending. Let them stage their show for an audience that isn't watching. Because you're not in that theater anymore. You've exited the performance. You've taken off the costume. And in your quiet, you've reclaimed something louder than anything they ever gave you, yourself. If this resonates with you, if you've felt the shift from reacting to rising, from chaos to calm, then do this. Like this video and comment. Number 1. If you're reclaiming your silence as your power. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button because we're not done. The path of Stoicism is deep, and what's coming next will elevate your perspective even further. 5. The haunting of what they can't reach. There's something different about the kind of absence that doesn't beg to be noticed, something chilling about the presence that lingers after you've walked away without turning back. They thought they were prepared for your silence. They thought if they kept themselves busy enough, distracted enough, surrounded by noise and people and posts, they could dilute the echo of your absence. But they were wrong. Because when you leave differently, without the door half open, without hints, without drama, it doesn't just hurt. It haunts. And not in a way that's obvious, not in the way they could name or point to. It's subtle. It's slow. It lives in the quiet gaps of their day, in the pauses that used to be filled with your voice, your check-ins, your loyalty. Stoicism teaches us to leave with clarity, not chaos, and that kind of clarity hits deeper than any argument could. You didn't storm out. You didn't try to prove anything. You just stopped giving what they never valued. You stopped explaining. You stopped performing. And now, they don't know what to do with the silence you left behind. Because it doesn't move like grief. It doesn't cry or call. It just sits there, invisible but heavy, present but untouchable. And they feel it. Not always in the moments they expect, but in the ones they can't predict. When a song comes on. When they reach for their phone at 1 a.m. and realize there's nothing to check. When they walk past a place tied to a memory, and the air feels different. That's when your absence whispers the truth they've been running from. You're really gone. And not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, energetically. They don't miss you, they miss access to you. They miss the version of you who cared too much, who replied too fast, who forgave too easily. And now that version is no longer available, they find themselves mourning something they never thought they'd lose: your consistency. That's the cruel beauty of Stoic relationships. You show up fully, but once you're gone, you're gone. No games. No breadcrumbs. Just stillness. And that stillness becomes the backdrop against which they start to unravel. Because people don't fear losing you as much as they fear realizing they can't reach you anymore. And when you're truly unreachable, not because you blocked them, but because you outgrew them, that's when the haunting begins. They won't admit it. They'll pretend they're fine. They'll keep up the image. But behind every curated moment is a question they can't answer. How did he leave so quietly? How did he get so strong? How is he not falling apart without me? And those questions aren't just thoughts. They're weights. They pull on their chest in moments of silence. They disrupt sleep. They color memories. Because the truth they avoided when they let you go is now the truth they can't escape. You mattered. More than they admitted. More than they showed. And now your absence is forcing them to feel what your presence always protected them from: themselves. That's what Stoicism does. It doesn't give people the reaction they expect. It gives them the reflection they need. And reflections, when you're not ready for them, are terrifying. You didn't need to remind them of what they lost. You didn't need to list your value or beg for validation. You just walked. And in walking, you shifted from being an option to being a realization. That realization? That they mishandled something real. That they fumbled someone steady. And that steady person is no longer responding. No longer available for apologies. No longer tethered to the cycle. You've broken the loop. And now, everything they do to try and reignite your attention falls flat. Because you're not reacting. You're not retaliating. You're not watching. And the less they hear from you, the more their mind starts to spiral. What if he's really done? What if I was never as important as I thought? What if this silence is permanent? And they don't have an answer. Because your stillness doesn't give them one. That's the torment of detachment. It forces the other person to do the work they avoided while they still had you. It pushes them into reflection they never signed up for. And while they're still looking for signs you might return, you're building something they can't reach: peace. Not the performative kind. The real kind. The quiet mornings. The long walks. The lack of emotional roller coasters. You're healing in ways that don't require an audience. And that, more than anything, is what haunts them. Not just that you left, but that you leveled up. That your life didn't fall apart without them. That your silence didn't come from weakness, it came from wisdom. That's the Stoic way. We don't scream to be understood. We don't fight to stay where we're no longer respected. We leave. We evolve. We let the silence do the explaining. And if they ever ask why, the answer is simple: because staying was killing the parts of us we needed most. And once we realized that, there was nothing left to say. They're still stuck in the illusion that absence is just distance. But true absence, the kind you've chosen, is presence in another form. It's in the way they can't forget you. In the way their distractions don't satisfy anymore. In the way they keep checking the door even though they know you're not coming back. You're not haunting them with rage or regret. You're haunting them with reality. With growth. With grace. That's what they never expected, that you'd become untouchable not by disappearing, but by becoming someone they can't access through old tricks. And now, all they have is the space you left. And that space? It's loud. It's constant. It's echoing. Just like your silence. 6. Detachment is the language of power. There's a shift that happens the moment you stop needing to explain your worth, when you stop arguing with what someone refuses to understand. That shift is called detachment. And contrary to what most people think, detachment isn't cold. It's not bitter. It's clarity. It's knowing when to step back, not to punish, but to protect. It's recognizing that love, in its most real form, cannot survive in a place where your boundaries are consistently crossed. In Stoicism, detachment is not the absence of emotion, it's the presence of self-awareness. It's not that you don't feel. It's that you've learned to stop letting your feelings be manipulated by people who only show up when it benefits them. And when you embrace that, when you learn to speak the language of detachment fluently, everything changes. You stop chasing closure. You stop needing explanations. You stop participating in emotional ping-pong matches where the only winner is confusion. Instead, you sit with yourself. You look inward. You ask the hard questions. Why was I staying in something that drained me? Why was I trying so hard to be seen by someone who refused to look? Why was I performing love instead of receiving it? And when the answers come, not as excuses, but as revelations, that's when your detachment turns into transformation. You realize you don't have to prove your worth to people who never appreciated it. You realize that silence, when rooted in respect for yourself, speaks louder than any words. That's the paradox. People think detachment is avoidance, but it's actually confrontation. Not of them, but of yourself. Of your habits. Your patterns. Your blind spots. And once you confront those, you begin to evolve. You begin to heal. You stop bleeding in places that never offered you a bandage. And that healing doesn't require an audience. It doesn't require applause. It just requires intention. Most people think they fear being alone, but what they really fear is being alone with their thoughts. And when you detach, when you no longer give someone the ability to stir chaos in your soul, you force them into that space. A space where their games don't work. Their charm doesn't land. Their silence doesn't punish. Because you're no longer responding from a place of need. You're responding from a place of peace. Detachment is power. Not because it makes you unreachable, but because it makes you unmoved by nonsense. You can still care. You can still love. But you no longer tolerate confusion where clarity is due. You no longer beg to be chosen. You no longer plead for someone to treat you with the same respect you offer freely. That's Stoicism at its core. To move with intention, not impulse. To protect your energy without needing to attack. To walk away without leaving pieces of yourself behind. And yes, it's hard. Especially if you were conditioned to equate love with struggle. If you were taught that the more you hurt, the more real it must be. But that's not love. That's attachment. That's emotional dependency dressed up as devotion. Detachment, on the other hand, is love for yourself. It's choosing not to re-enter cycles just because they're familiar. It's standing still while everything around you tries to provoke a reaction. And in that stillness, you reclaim your voice. Not the one that speaks out of pain, but the one that speaks out of power. You don't need them to validate your growth. You just need to keep growing. You don't need them to notice your silence. You just need to let it speak for itself. And believe me, it will. It already has. Every time you chose peace over panic. Every time you stayed silent instead of sending that "I miss you" text. Every time you reminded yourself that your value isn't defined by someone's inability to see it. That's Stoic strength. That's emotional maturity. That's the new language you speak. And those who only understood you when you were reactive won't be able to hear you now that you're resolved. Let them misinterpret your silence. Let them call it pride, coldness, ego. You're not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to be aligned with yourself. And when you are, detachment doesn't feel like losing something. It feels like gaining everything you forgot you needed: clarity, self-trust, inner calm. That's what they never expected. That their games would stop working. That their silence would be met with silence. That their inconsistency would be returned with indifference. And it's not because you don't care. It's because you finally do. about your peace, your standards, your evolution. And when you finally live from that place, the people who once had emotional power over you begin to lose their grip. Not because you pulled away in anger, but because you stopped leaning in altogether. You realize that the version of you they were playing with is no longer available. That version is healing. That version is rising. That version has learned the language of detachment, and it doesn't include begging for access to someone who misused your openness. If you've ever been there, if you've ever felt that shift from reaction to realization, then you know what I mean. You don't have to announce it. You don't have to prove it. Your energy speaks before you do, and they feel it. Every time you don't show up in the ways they took for granted. Every time you don't respond to the bait. Every time you post not to prove something, but to express your own joy. You've become the closure they didn't ask for. The ending they didn't want. The reflection they weren't ready to face. And now, they speak to an empty space. Not because you vanished, but because you evolved beyond their reach. That's what detachment does. It doesn't burn bridges, it builds boundaries. It doesn't scream. It states. It doesn't retaliate, it reclaims. And in that quiet reclamation, you become the one thing they never expected, a person who no longer needs them to be okay. If this resonates with you, if you're embracing your power in detachment and walking in your evolution, then like this video and comment. Number 1. To let the world know you're done negotiating your worth. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because the next chapter in your journey of stoicism and self-mastery is waiting, and you won't want to miss it. So here we are, at the edge of silence and the beginning of something much deeper, your return to self. And maybe, just maybe, this is the real point of the journey. Not the absence you left behind, but the presence you stepped into. Throughout everything, the performance, the pretending, the haunting quiet, you didn't just fade. You transformed. You didn't go silent to disappear. You went silent to rediscover. And in that rediscovery, you've unearthed something they never expected you to find, your strength without their approval, your stability without their presence, your direction without their guidance. That's the paradox of Stoic relationships. They don't depend on performance. They don't seek closure through conflict. They don't demand attention to prove something. They evolve through discipline, through detachment, through self-possession. And what you've done by staying still, by staying silent, is far more powerful than any message you could have sent, any reaction you could have given, any explanation you could have offered. You have shifted from being someone they could once provoke to someone they can no longer predict. And that unpredictability, that mystery, that composure, it lingers. It teaches. It echoes. In Stoicism, we are taught not to escape our emotions but to master them. To feel deeply without being destroyed by the depth. To love truly without needing to control. To walk away without bitterness and remain still without apology. That is the art of restraint. And you've mastered it, not by becoming less, but by becoming more aligned, more grounded, more powerful. They'll never admit it, but they feel the difference. They may keep performing for the world, but the stage is empty without your attention. They may still be speaking, but your silence has become the main character in the story. Not because you're haunting them with regret, but because you're now the benchmark by which they measure emotional presence, and it's one they can't meet anymore. Not because they can't reach you, but because you no longer lower yourself to be reachable by someone unwilling to grow. You've stopped asking for understanding from those committed to misunderstanding you. You've stopped feeding narratives that end with you questioning your own worth. And maybe you still check in with yourself. Maybe there are nights when the silence feels heavy. Maybe you still wonder what they think, what they feel, if they ever truly knew what they had. That's okay. You're human. But don't mistake those moments for weakness. They're reminders. Markers of how far you've come. How much you've grown. Because even in those moments you didn't go back. You didn't reach out. You didn't abandon yourself to make someone else feel secure. And that, more than anything, is the difference between the person you were and the person you're becoming. You are no longer responding from a wound. You're living from a scar that has healed, from strength that was earned, not inherited. This silence you've chosen is not passive. It's deliberate. It's filled with intention, purpose, evolution. You didn't shut down. You shut off access. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. Because you finally understood that your emotional energy is sacred, and not everyone deserves a front row seat to your life. That's the maturity Stoicism gives you. It's not indifference, it's discernment. It's not detachment from feeling, it's detachment from unnecessary suffering. And the silence they feared wasn't the end. It was the beginning of your throne, of your standard, of your transformation. They expected you to collapse, but you flew. They expected you to chase, but you built. They expected you to explain, but you elevated. And now you live in a realm of peace they can't reach, because they are still trying to create noise in a world that doesn't answer to it anymore. You've exited the performance. You've outgrown the storyline. You've changed the frequency. And now you are the echo, not of pain, but of progress. Not of grief, but of growth. You are the silence that doesn't just say, "I'm gone." You are the silence that says, "I'm home." Home in yourself. In your values. In your clarity. In your future. They'll keep pretending. That's their path. But you? You're done pretending. You're living. Fully. Authentically. Powerfully. Not in opposition to them, but in alignment with you. And if that silence echoes in their soul, then let it. Not as punishment, but as the final lesson. Because what you gave was real. What you walked away from was necessary. And what you're stepping into now, this next chapter, isn't about who left. It's about who you're becoming. And who you're becoming? That's the most powerful thing they never saw coming.